Carry any point.
No.
No, carry any point.
It was a troll point.
Yeah.
It was a complete troll point.
Oh, okay.
It was about an arch that just kept standing through the world wars, through nuclear winter and all that shit, and it's still alive.
Even after the earthquake, it's
still standing.
I mean, it's 2 planks of wood, like, you can't really fuck that up, really.
No, it's 2 planks of nanites. It's resistant nuclear war and earthquakes. You don't get that shit to 2 planks of wood.
Yeah, especially considering that when the Nagasaki bomb was dropped, most of the houses were made of wood.
Yeah. And we all know how that shit went.
Do we have any more questions for Mazin?
I'm good. Thank you.
I'd love to see you take this up to World War II.
One last question. What was the weaponry like back then?
I really wish Dan Carlin did something wrong. I wish Dan Carlin covered like Japanese or Chinese history.
See, most of the weaponry in this
I
haven't gone into huge detail. Now, of course, of course, Japan at this point did have rifles and everything.
Yeah.
They were called the Tanegashima rifles.
Okay.
But they were made in Japan. Okay. But they were, of course, fairly inefficient. Of course, now, in this era, at this point, you see an increase in Western weaponry coming. Because, as I said now,
the
black ships.
Yeah, that's all. Okay.
Yeah.
So the average Japanese soldier at the time would have been.
See, at this time, of course, they were still in the samurais. So most of the foot soldiers, the tactics, of course, were pretty much the same as they were in the previous era. Okay. You'd have the samurai charging in, fighting with swords, and then you have the riflemen and machine gunners acting purely in support roles.
Okay.
It's only when you go.
So riflemen and machine gunners were.
They were in the back supporting the.
So they were
machine guns.
That's what I'm asking.
They had the whole.
No, they had the British.
That come through the British machine.
Yeah, exactly. They came through the
British made that machine gun back in the day. So the riflemen essentially replaced the archers of the era.
Pretty much.
The archers who were the samurai.
Yeah.
Well, samurai or multi-gun.
Well, also the Ashigara.
But their primary role was.
See, the samurai, of course, were the military men at this era.
Yeah. Their primary weapon was the probably not in Meiji area, but from what I understood was that their main weapon was a bow and arrow, and the sword was mainly like.
There were bowmen, there were swordsmen, there were spearmen, and they had Goombas who were the rank and file, who were also bowmen and spearmen and.
From my understanding,
and also riflemen.
From my understanding, they mainly used the bow and arrow. Like the sword, they obviously used.
They did not
No, it was mainly the sword.
Yeah. Which is where the system of the dual swords comes from, right? You have the katana, and you have the short thing for stabbing.
But surely those were ceremonial. I remember there was something about.
They became ceremonial.
They definitely would open with a bow because they didn't have shields.
So they actually, no, they had a strategy for the arrows because now, see the riflemen, of course. Now there would be they would just use simple planks of wood, because the long rangers, the archers and the riflemen, they put them behind wooden planks of wood, where they would just crouch.
Okay.
So that was how they shielded. Of course.
No, but I mean in hand-to-hand combat.
In hand-to-hand combat, of course.
Shields.
They didn't have shields at all.
First.
Yeah, you just had to swing fast and hope for the best.
Steel suck balls.
Their steel did suck balls.
Was the reason that the Meiji Empire was it because of the advanced weaponry that they had?
Pretty much, it was mostly it was the advanced weaponry, because even though despite the shogunate was getting slightly modernized at this point, it's just that as you saw in the second Choshu expedition, as I mentioned, the shogunate forces, they were beaten badly there because the Choshu forces had more modern weaponry. At this point, of course, now the shogunate realized, okay, we need to start modernizing our weapons.
So does this indicate Western influence?
Yes, actually now, as I said, now following the restoration, you had a wide series of reforms. Now these reforms were to transform Japan into a modern nation, and at that time the definition of a modern nation in Japan was a Western nation. So you had literal reforms that transformed the entire country. The military, its tactics, weapons, uniforms would change to Western styles. You had Western clothing taking over. The government that followed and the constitution itself was even based on Western styles.
And this never really went away.
Huh?
This way of thinking never really went away.
see, the thinking itself never really went away now. Towards the Showa era, of course, you had that where the thinking comes, this stays at a standstill, where it's slightly merged with, the Japanese culture and this Western style. But of course, we saw how that turned out. So after the war, of course, again they were open to more Western styles, especially with the Americans, because during the after the war, the Americans had a huge effect on transforming Japan, because the Americans decided how the Japanese would function afterwards. The Education Act, decided by General Douglas MacArthur. Even the Constitution itself, everything was decided pretty much by MacArthur.
I heard that MacArthur himself, as the Japanese perceived him as the conquering lord, and he could have happily set up a dynasty for himself, and he would have been accepted.
He could have actually.
But MacArthur's son.
They didn't, of course, because of rising Russian influence. Because now the Cold War was coming on, so they wanted Japan to be a proper ally for them.
That's why they set up and allowed them to, help them industrialize, and that's why you have like glass lenses and all that made in Japan that are very, very high tech, because they propped that up. Also, it's one of the explanations of why they nuked. One of the rationalizations behind it was that even if you conquer the Japanese through a regular victory, because of the way their culture was, at least this is what the Western people thought, but their culture was that because it's honor based and all that, they would not live with simply being defeated by an army. But if you drop 2 nukes on them, like, they will just see how immensely more powerful the enemy is.
See, when it comes to the nuking decision, now the Americans actually had a plan to conquer all of Japan. But see now, as you went through the island hopping process, in reality they realized they were getting their asses kicked massively. Soldiers were dying on both sides, and even in some Japanese colonies, after the Americans had won, you had these groups of Japanese people who would literally commit suicide. They would go to the cliffs. You would have mothers with their babies jumping off cliffs to commit suicide. So now the Americans, of course, realized.
Also, they believed that they would just all die, right? Even the women and children would get killed.
Now there was a huge fear even for that. Once the Americans had won the war, that in Japan, that their soldiers would be barbarians. They'd rape the women and everything.
Basically, what the Russians did.
Yeah, exactly what the Russians.
At the end of the day, that's all of these are justifications. There's a big red button and interested.
Exactly.
Well, the way they teach it in the American universities is that it was a numbers game, and they figured fewer Americans would die, and fewer Japanese people would die if they dropped the bomb, and that is objectively true. However, another way of looking at it is you could have dropped it on a forest. Dropped on a city, well, it's curious. I'm sure Stalin saw pictures of that.
See, Stalin actually was trying to, at one point, he tried to take over all of Japan.
It was a statement. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were 2 giant statements.
They were giant statements also, because
not just to Japan but to Russia also.
Stalin, of course,
I think primarily messages to Russia.
Exactly, because Stalin, he actually was trying at one point. He conquered the northern Sakhalin Islands or the Kurilan Islands. I'm not sure of that, but he
took the Kuril Islands right at the end, basically.
There was a Russo-Japanese war where the Japanese. Was it the Japanese that kicked their asses?
It was 1905.
Oh,
that was also an interesting point.
Sorry?
That wasn't Stalin, or that was the...
that was Tsarist.
That was Tsarist.
That was one of the shockers to Russian morale then.
That was not just the shocker to Russian morale.
By Japan, that's how people saw Japan then. And for the Russian Black Sea, I think the Black Sea Fleet.
Yes.
There's a war over that area right now, right?
Exactly.
For this reason, it's the only war port, and it involved. So we had to basically sail around the world to go meet the Japanese. The Japanese sank them. So thank you for coming.
Japanese fucked them all. Like the Russians had a numbers advantage or something, right?
The Russians,
all that.
The Russians had a huge navy.
The Japanese, by all accounts, were extremely fierce fighters. Like the Americans, literally, they weren't getting their asses kicked out of the area, but
they were taking casualties. They were
taking casualties left, right,
if you can protect your soldiers' lives, why don't you? And if anyone's killing their lives, well, guess what? That's your job, right? And I don't think America needs to apologize for that, right? But I think that it's not as simple as that. I think there were other reasons for dropping the bombs.
Actually, there were other reasons for dropping the bombs. Now, one of course, as you said, was Stalin, and
also the scientific, wasn't there like a scientific, interest? If you drop it in a city, you can see the actual human casualties and the effects on an actual city. But it was a small city as well. So there's another thing.
They saw the Germans as people. They did not the Japanese as people. You hear stories of like Americans who sent back there was one account a professor of mine told me about how this one American who sent back a piece of a Japanese soldier's shin bone to his fiancée.
That's
because there was a lot of viciousness in the war.
But I would not to justify this, but I would also say that this
is all being recorded.
I have no issues with that. The Japanese were brutal and vicious before the war, especially with China, Korea.
They were just as bad as the Germans. They've really gotten away with it. No one is giving them the shrift they deserve.
In a way, not looking at them as, but the Germans with taking Auschwitz out.
Rasan, think hard what you're saying.
Yes.
You'll help you to make.
Okay. There was a scene, guys. There's a scene in James. Hold on. There's a scene in James Cover's show.
The Japanese were ready to totally and completely annihilate an entire. Complete. Not just a pure race or nothing. They were ready to completely destroy China and.
Actually,
well, it did. Rape of Nanking.
Right.
But the difference.
Actually, now when you talk about Japanese war crimes, the interesting thing is, now we both know how Germany was messed up.
Yeah.
With Germany, you had everybody getting, put on trials, executed, life in prison, and all that.
Japan was indiscriminate, just chill.
Japan did the same thing, but now when we come there.
Okay, this is not.
A lot of Japanese soldiers got rough justice at the end of the war. The Americans.
They got
I don't think this should be on record.
No, a lot of them got killed.
It's not on record.
This is recorded the whole time.
Yeah.
I'm
fine with it.
You really shouldn't be saying something you can't back it up. But the thing is, even if you don't consider the atrocities that the Germans did commit, it's not what the Germans did was not purely a numbers game. Like the British killed far more people in India, but not far more, slightly more. But the difference is that the way the Germans did it, they did it in an industrial scale, and they did it with
the Germans actually had plans to depopulate. The Japanese did it, and
they didn't give a damn. They just.
That's true barbarism. That's true barbarism.
Dude, here's a really good
I'm not
example.
justifying.
Hold on, there's a really good example. In James Cover's Shogun, which is one of the best research books ever about Japanese culture back then, there's a scene in which these two people are walking and an oil seller steps into the samurai's path. Without even thinking, the samurai draws out his sword and cuts him in half. That is very indicative of Japanese culture. They were designed, the social structure at the time was designed so that samurai and the others, they were not seen as people.
It was a strong class.
They were just seen as things, and this mentality took them forward. It was taken forward into war.
But see, the point you're making is that it was horrible what they did.
Actually,
why is the Americans not seen Japanese?
I'm not saying that.
Wait, guys. See, now about that caste system you were mentioning. See, that caste system was actually destroyed after the Meiji government took power.
Yes, was. But that mentality.
However, in World War II, the Americans would complain about how when a Japanese ship was sunk, the Americans would pick up the Japanese, and when an American ship was sunk, the Japanese used the Americans for target practice.
Yes. Yeah. See, that attitude
that doesn't make them better or worse. See, it's a very poor comparison when you're trying to say it was worse.
You're not saying it was worse.
Yeah, that is definitely a useless question.
It's a useless word.
Hitler or Japan? Well, you know what? They both are in the history books.
Yeah, that's the thing. No, we are not saying who's worse. That is a debate that nobody can get.
Let me go to.
Definitely not a debate that should be on the internet.
Hawaii.
Everything. It's like
it was brought up. The comparison.
If you want something non-public record, just say we can end the discussion now.
Yeah, we probably should.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Yes, Dimitri Fernando over there, who lives at what's his address? Some umbrella. Yes.